Hello and welcome to the Royal Blue Podcast. I'm Ian Kroll and we're here to talk all things Everton, and joining me to do so we have Joe Thomas. Joe, you actually made it into the office after your train journey from hell. What happened?
It wasn't too bad, but there's a few trespassers on the line, so...
I had a message from Joe to say Ian might not be in for the podcast, but I am going to try my best, and Joe, professional as always, has made it in.
Used his influence on the train driver, yeah.
He certainly has. Yeah. Well, good to have you in, Joe. Obviously, here to talk all things Everton, and obviously, sitting Premier League warning, as reported last night. Gav, how are things? All good?
Fine, mate, yeah. First pod of the week.
Yeah, it is,
yeah. I've been busy elsewhere.
You took a little bit of criticism in the comments section of our last pod.
all good stuff. Yeah, around.
Absolutely.
You've got to give a balanced view on pods, and I think the Branthwaite one I was talking about what Man United's view of the world would have been, not necessarily Everton's, in terms of how they would value him, given his lack of international recognition and the fact he was still unproven. And I think that's a fair point. But also said, that Everton's 70 million was pretty reasonable if you view it in how much, say, Wesley Fofana, a similar player, a similar age, went for. So you've always got to give a balanced view on the pod, haven't you?
No, of course, and we all respect your views and opinions, and obviously, you maybe took a little bit of a criticism in regards to the value of Branthwaite, but we will get into it. I feel like it will give you a little bit more of a chance to address that, because transfers are, a big talking point lately, and we will talk about Branthwaite and plenty more to come as well. Before we do, it's Sean Dyche's birthday today, 53 years old. Chris Beasley reliably informs me that he's off to Glastonbury.
He is.
Yeah. Are you a Glastonbury fan, Gav? No, never been.
Bit beyond mine. No.
Not even in your younger days.
When I was younger, Glastonbury was a CND festival. That was basically a couple of caravans and a tent, and that was it.
Yeah.
In the late 70s, early 80s.
Bit different now, isn't it?
Oh yeah, massively. But
Joe?
I'm not a fan. I've not heard of most of the groups who are on.
No.
So I'm not a fan.
Are you, Joe? Would you can see you in a tent in Glastonbury festival style?
Well, I can tell you this, that Sean Dyche is not camping.
He's not camping, I'm sure he's not. Glamping, is he?
A Joe Thomas exclusive. He's not camping. I mean, he did have tickets for it. So expect... I quite like the contrast, really, the fact that we're going to be spending a weekend worrying about PSR and things like that, and he's just going to be back in his bucket hat at Glastonbury. Bucket hat, which he tells me is not for stylistic reasons; it's to protect his skull from the sunshine. So I've never been. Would I like to go? Yeah, probably would. Just to say that I've been. Really, I've never really been a festival kind of goer. So. But if the tickets dropped into my hands and the opportunity came, then I'd definitely consider it. So
yeah, I'm not a festival goer, to be honest. I think the one festival I've done is the V Festival. Yeah. I think Glastonbury would be a bit too much for me, certainly in my old age nowadays anyway. Okay, let's do a bit of promo as usual. I'm sure you regulars will know by now. Obviously, please show us your support by giving us a like, give us a share, and giving us a subscribe. All your support is greatly appreciated. And once this show is finished, we will be putting the audio side of the pod on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, which will roughly be within the hour or two. So if you prefer to listen, you can listen to it there as well. We are live on YouTube as well, so please leave us a comment. Greatly appreciated if you do. Opinion, question, just your thoughts. Let us know what you're doing. Relax Friday afternoon. I'm sure it might be a bit of a feisty one, this. I know, Gav, we spoke before and you don't want to get too much into it, but I know Joe's written a couple of pieces this week with regards to the absolute nonsense or whatever the Premier League have maybe been reported this week. But, we will get into it. So the agenda is basically the news that was reported last night, that the Premier League has warned all 20 Premier League clubs that so-called PSR swap deals will come under some scrutiny. We'll come to you, Joe, first, but before I do, I just want to read out I'm not going to read out the whole Telegraph article because I just kind of picked out the bullet points, a couple of excerpts from what was stated in that article that caused a bit of an uproar last night on Twitter. I actually couldn't put my phone down. I don't know what you guys were like.
We know you couldn't put your foot down. I mean, you're very outspoken on Twitter.
My phone. Kaylee wasn't happy with me at all. She wanted to watch a film and I was just on my phone. Anyway, let's go into it. First bullet point. So, the Premier League has written to its 20 clubs to remind them they will be punished for fraudulent player transfers as scrutiny grows on the so-called swap deals. I mean, just on that, Joe, what is your first thoughts with regards to that line?
I just think it's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, it's just wild. Everton have broken the transfer system, haven't they? Let's be honest. They've absolutely driven a coach and horses through it over the last few years. That isn't really a badge of honour. We're in a situation where the club has kind of been public enemy number one from a PSR perspective because of the club's own failings and the way it's been run. Like, I think that still has, even though we've moved on so much from where we were at the beginning, back in November when the first points deduction came, everything like that. And I think that the argument has moved on a long way from that. I still think it's important just to bear in mind that I think I certainly believe this anyway, that the club created these problems for itself. But that doesn't mean to say that the system has integrity or that it's fit for purpose. Doesn't mean to say that Everton necessarily been treated fairly through it, and it doesn't mean to say that Everton haven't exposed problem after problem after problem with it. This is just the latest one, and I find it absolutely remarkable. I mean, where's the scrutiny been for? I mean, 2013, the current PSR rules, although they have been modified at various points, kind of came into effect. And where's the scrutiny been for 11 years? How many times have we seen young players go to between Premier League clubs or from Premier League clubs to clubs abroad or clubs in the Championship for significant fees, despite having very limited Premier League experience? How long have we been talking about the inflated price of English or British youth within the transfer market? All of a sudden, for this to start coming to a head from a regulatory perspective in the Premier League, to start talking about cracking down on these things right now at this point, is just utterly remarkable. I find it crazy, and it's strange, really. Like, I mean, the Premier League doesn't want to stand up and talk about, when you've got big clubs that are just hoarding young player after young player, often to the detriment of those players, certainly to the detriment of the footballing pyramid and the young players that would grow up and be exposed to first team football through football league clubs and things like that, and the fans that would get to take part in that journey, whether it be a Joe Hart coming through a Shrewsbury first or a Dele Alli coming through an MK Dons. All that's been taken away from the game to things like this. I just find it mad that the hills the Premier League seems to be willing to die on, and like the headline of my piece was, the other day, Everton, the bad guys again. It just seems to be, and that was with a question mark. That was a rhetorical question, not a statement.
No, yeah.
It just seems to be that Everton are trapped in a bit of a cycle at the minute, and I feel very much like it's the Premier League that's trapping them. It's their fault that they're in the PSR mess that they're in, but surely part of profit and sustainability rules should include sustainability, and surely part of any punishment should include an opportunity to rehabilitate. And I just don't understand how the Premier League are giving Everton any opportunity to do that. How can you improve the position once you're in a bad situation? Well, maybe you could climb up the league table. Well, they have done, but the 8 points that they got deducted cost them £9 million in merit payments. Well, that might be the difference between having to sell a Lewis Dobbin or not. If Everton didn't have the uncertainty because of the unsuitable process of the cases and the hearings and the appeals hanging over the club for the first half of this year. Do I think that Everton would have got 2 more points this season? Well, I mean, they broke a 30-year record for their worst ever Premier League run without a win, so I very much think they would have got 2 more points without that outside pressure. All of a sudden, they're 2 places higher. You're looking at a £15 million windfall in terms of where they'd be finishing. So you take the points deductions, take that ability to, or that option to improve your position away. What others have you got? Well, you could sell your best players. Well, under these circumstances, Premier League will have you sell them before a false deadline on June the 30th, by which ruthless clubs can exploit the vulnerable ones, just like Tottenham did with Richarlison, and you end up having to potentially countenance a deal which is where you undersell a key player for millions and millions of pounds. You weaken your Premier League position and you weaken your bank account. How is that sustainable? And then we look at the other way around, and I'm not for 1 second saying that I agree with anybody that's saying that the Lewis Dobbin and Tim Iroegbunam deal is a PSR workaround. I think that the PSR impact, the positive PSR impact it has for both clubs is a sweetener, but I can see football reasons for both deals as well, and I think that's important. But what else can the club do other than perhaps sell young squad players in a move that still arguably strengthens the squad when you look at the overall deal that's been done. And again, you get this scrutiny. What is the club supposed to do in the short term? Because Premier League might come back and say you improve your commercial performance, you improve your the way in which you're dealing with your finances and your debts, and you drive that down. That drives interest down. Those aren't short-term solutions. Those aren't short-term answers. Yes, you can do it over a long period of time, and it looks like Everton are trying to do that. But in terms of what you can do right here, right now, to try and improve your position, everywhere Everton are turning, it seems like they're getting accusatory glances from Premier League rivals and the Premier League itself, and I just think it's absolutely wild. I mean, sorry, that was a long.
No, it's all good points, to be honest, Joe. Gav, I'll finish the excerpts then from the Telegraph, which I assume you did read. Again, these are just bullet points, so it's not the full article, but the Premier League's Director of Governance, Jamie Herbert, has warned clubs that his department is looking for, quote, issues of concern around whether deals represent good faith, quote, arm's length transactions over £1 million. If the league decides that the transfer was not conducted at arm's length, it can then impose fair market value FMV rules. I'm just going to carry on. The FMV rules for assessing the fair value of a player list 18 factors. It applies and detailed at length in an Appendix 19 of the Premier League Handbook. Those include everything from players' ages to his position to his playing statistics, honours and injury history. To finish off with one of the last excerpts, Herbert has reminded clubs that it has power to order the return of a transfer fee in full or in part to a buying club if it judges that the fee has been inflated. I mean, we'll get your thoughts on it right now, but that last point is absolutely crazy for me.
Yeah, about give money back.
Well, yeah, effectively.
Yeah, that's only if there's a swap. We're only talking about swap deals here, aren't we? We're not talking about individual transactions. The Premier League, if you sell a player to another club and there's no player that comes in the turn, the Premier League are happy with that. That's called an arm's length transfer. The problem happens is if you swap a player, you swap a player and they, with each other like us and Aston Villa, and then there's the potential there for you to overvalue those players to the jointly agree to overvalue those players to both clubs' mutual benefit. And this is the type of stuff Juventus got into trouble with over the transfer of Barcelona of Arthur and Pjanic a few years ago, which set up all the alarm bells with the swap players for overvalued price. And that's what the Premier League wants to stop. They're not. What they're saying is here, if you swap players like Everton and Villa, as long as they are within the market value of the players, and I think £10 million is a little bit more, but not you wouldn't be concerned about, would you really? And likewise with the developer, they're quite happy with that. What they're warning clubs about is saying what we don't want in the future is you swapping players where both of you have jointly agreed to to overinflate their value to your mutual benefit in the short term to avoid PSR. So like say we value Dobbin at 25 million and Villa valued at 25 million, the other fella, it's quite obviously being, regardless of our opinions, the potential massively overpriced. That's when the good faith kicks in. They're quite happy, and it's rule E64 in the handbook is if it's on a fair market value, which these are, they're quite happy. That's why for all the bluster last night, or fans saying, the Premier League got in for Everton, they're trying to stop us out play. They're not. They've ratified it because 10 million to them is a fair price. They will only interject if it is far more. The price is far more than what people think. They're not really bothered about one club selling an academy graduates or whatever to another club for whatever, for 20 million quid, as long as because that's on its arm's length. Both clubs are acting in their mutual in their own self-interest. They're only interested if another player comes in the opposite way and you can manipulate the fees. And they're quite happy within this Everton Villa deal. That's not happened. That 10 million is fair.
But why? It's no coincidence that they're bringing it up now, though, is it? Why bring it up now if nothing's?
Because I doubt very much. Going back, if you look back over the last few years, well, for the start, people have not needed to because there's not been any PSR issues as there for any club before Everton. So there's no need to do a last-minute deal swapping players. So that's the first reason, and I just don't think it's been done before for that reason, and because nobody's had PSR issues up until now. So what the firing, quite rightly for me, a warning shot across the bows of Premier League clubs. What we don't want is next summer it becomes farcical, where you've got maybe 6 or 7 clubs just swapping players for vastly inflated fees, and the whole thing just falls apart then, doesn't it? And it's quite right for them to do that. And for me, it's a bit of a storm in the teacup. And people talk about being a loophole. It's not really, is it? Because at the end of the day, we look at, we've got Dobbin for 9 million. But we then, that's good, helps us with our PSR, which we'll talk about. But we then got a Villa player. We've got his wage costs and his transfer fee to pay off over the next 3 years. So the two things over a 3 or 4 period will balance each other out. We're not actually gaining financially over a 3-year period. And I think I fully understand why the Premier League want to do that. I read something rather alarming early on the week. There's talk, isn't it, that clubs will effectively have 2 transfer windows within the one, where up until the 30th of June, they will just jointly agree to sell players just to avoid PSR, good housekeeping and that type of stuff. And only after the 30th of June will they start building their squad for the following season. And so what the Premier League is saying is what we don't want next year is a load of swaps between clubs at inflated values that actually just bring the whole thing into disrepute. We are happy with you to swap players if they are a fair market value, which in our case with the with the Villa swap, it obviously is. I mean, a couple of million over, but they're not going to die in a ditch over that, are they? And the last thing the Premier League wants as well within all of this is give money back. You've breached PSR. And by the way, you've got another case with you that's going to cost us millions of pounds in legal fees, when actually, if it had just agreed it in the first place, we'd let you off with a couple of million quid, we wouldn't be there. So I think it's just reminding clubs of the rules that they've signed up to and have agreed. So I don't really have an issue with it. I don't think it's anything to do with Everton. They just heading something off at the past that could have, implications for if done ad infinitum. There's lots of deals like that. I haven't said all of that. I can see why there is a bit of eye when you throw in what Joe's saying there about, PSR and what Chelsea have done with hotels and stuff like this. You can see why within the context of that. But within the rule book, and for what we've known about the way Everton's transfer was dealt with Aston Villa, I've not got a problem. It's just good governance. But he's got a busy job, by the way, the governance for the Premier League. I don't have a problem with it.
I mean, Gav says it's a storm in a teacup, but the timing probably couldn't be worse from the Premier League. Did they need to send this warning, this letter this week? I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but it does almost seem like you're labelling these teams as being guilty already by sending this warning out. From my point of view, anyway.
I think that would probably be response to Gav's, but I agree with a lot of what Gav's saying, and I think that, do I see anything coming of this? No. Do I see any potential whatsoever for the Premier League to be able to look at the Everton and Aston Villa deals and actually find or be able to prove any problems? No, not really. I mean, there is a line where it talks about the Premier League being able to get hold of communications between the clubs. Well, I would hope there's nothing I'd hope there's not like an email from one to the other saying, what can you do to...
Well, as long as it's fair, as long as the transfer is then a fair value,
yeah.
That what they're saying is perfectly fine.
But I do think that, I do think that the timing is clearly quite telling here. Really, if the Premier League wanted to do this without casting aspersions over deals that had already been done, at least in a kind of from a moral point of view, rather than perhaps a kind of a regulatory one, it could have just waited 6 weeks, or it could have been something that issued on September the 2nd or something like that. I feel like a lot of what I feel like the Premier League has become an organisation that is focusing very heavily, and we've seen this for much of the past year, particularly with the football governance committees and the intention to bring in outside regulation for the Premier League. I feel like it's become an organisation that takes its own PR very, very seriously and spends a lot of time almost trying to manage its reputation. And it feels like the timing of this, it can only have been triggered by something that it's seen this week. And it may well be a deal that it's seen that it's a bit uneasy with. It may well be a trend that it's seeing within certain deals, or it may well be that, other owners or people have complained to them or something like that. I think it's I agree with Gav in the sense that I don't think Everton actually have anything to worry about. No. Like I don't.
Well, it's all been ratified anyway.
But so I agree on that front. But obviously, as I say, this is something that I think that if it wasn't triggered by recent events, then it could have just been sent, and probably still should have just been sent in the beginning of September, when you don't have the obvious, you can't draw the obvious causal link.
I don't think Premier League clubs need reminding of the rules. I know you're going to say, well, they probably do because clubs have broken it. But Everton, probably more so, should know the rules inside out after what has happened over the past 2 to 3 years. I just think the timing of it couldn't be worse.
I think you have to see the rules and adherence to them and the interpretation of them as fluid, and as we're still in relatively new territory on a lot of things, especially in relation to financial regulation. Although rules might have been in place for the best part of a decade, we're only really seeing the kind of the firm interpretation and use and use of them and enforcement of them over the past 8 months or so. And as a result of that, I think you're seeing quite a kind of a fluid situation where clubs are pushing into the grey areas and the Premier League is pushing into grey. I mean, the biggest grey area in the whole thing is the lack of consistency over how these rules and how the breaches that we've seen so far have been interpreted and then punished as a result. And obviously, the Premier League will say that's by design, and they'll say that the Premier League clubs had a big impact in that by voting for there not to be a set tariff system of points per millions of pounds in size of breach. But I still think we're in a situation where both the Premier League and the club are operating in grey areas and certain, and as a result of that, you will see a bit of fluidity and a bit of agility as people try and find workarounds, and it's incumbent really on the Premier League as a regulator to try and close as many of those off now. Maybe this warning is part of that, and I think, look, we all want to see fair market value. We all want to be fair and equal and things like that. It's the best way to have a Premier League with integrity and a competition which is fair, that gives everybody the best chance of being able to compete with each other. So that's nothing, but it's it's when you see things like these letters coming through and the scrutiny that's being cast on some of the deals that we're seeing, but then you see the failures to clamp down on something like the infrastructure sales between companies within the same group, aka Chelsea, with the hotels. That feels like a more kind of obvious thing to be concerned about and to be trying to clamp down on. And of course, again, just in relation to that, I think that was put to a Premier League vote and it didn't get over the line. So
it didn't get over the line in the sense that Chelsea should be punished for it.
Well, it didn't get over the line in the sense that that technique to improve a club's profit and sustainability position should be taken out of the equation. So the Premier League clubs voted it down. So
yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? That was last night. People were saying, well, what about this stuff with the Chelsea and blaming the Premier League? But actually, the Premier League didn't want that to happen. They don't want that rule where you can sell a non-footballing asset like a hotel and include as part of your PSR calculations. And as Joe said, they put it to a vote, and the vote was lost. The clubs voted marginally to retain that. So it's not as if the Premier League has sat on the backside and allowed Chelsea to do that. They were quite happy to do that. They don't want that to happen, but the clubs do.
Do we know what clubs?
I think it was 11-9, was it, against changing the rules? I don't know what clubs were, but they want to get this far starting the Championship about selling the stage. To move from the Championship, UEFA don't allow it in their regs. But that's where we end up, sometimes shooting at the wrong target. The Chelsea thing is not really. You can't really shoot the Premier League for that because they don't want it either. The clubs.
I mean, where the farce is this idea that that everybody should be acting in good faith. Firstly, how do you judge good faith? How do you how do you place in like an arbitrary kind of interpretation of something that really is so subjective. And the second problem with it is, well, how can you expect anyone to operate in good faith because everyone operates in self-interest, including the Premier League, and that's the way it's always been.
Well, is this not another example then, with these PSR rules not being fit for purpose?
Well, yeah, to a certain extent. I think that, again, sorry to cut you off, Gav.
No, sorry.
Like I think, the notion of financial regulation, I think, is very, very valid and very, very important. And I do think that we've perhaps ended up in a situation where there's been a lot more focus on all this, more than anybody would really want, because there's probably a hope that it would never get this far with a lot of these things. But I do think that we've seen on several. I think we've got several strands of evidence now to suggest that the Premier League as a regulatory body, it is a bit problematic that it's both promoter and regulator, and some outside external regulation might strengthen the game from a wider perspective.
Now, I was going to say, talking about good faith, one of the examples in the rule book of what they say is bad faith is bending the rules to circumvent PSR. So that's what they're concerned about here is clubs putting up the prices, artificially inflating them of academy players to bend the rules. And that's what they say, that is bad faith, and you can see that. And it's academy players, and I said last week, didn't I, about the transfer window becoming a bit of a meat market. Is academy players are useful for two reasons: A, it's all profit, isn't it, when you swap them, yep. And B, how do you quantify potential? We were talking about quantifying potential last week about Branthwaite, weren't we? You could argue anything. You could argue that we think Lewis Dobbin's a £20 million player. He scored the Premier League goal. How do you quantify that? So there is stuff around what is good faith and what isn't in relation to PSR. But the underlying thing is true, though, around this date now, 30th of June, has become more important than the transfer deadline day, hasn't it, in some respects, and that's all down to the rule book, and that in itself is an issue, isn't it, really?
Loads of questions coming in, some really good stuff, so I'm going to try and read them out, as many as possible, but I'll come to you on this one, Gav, because you kind of mentioned academy players. So Oz has said, Ryan Brewster, Liverpool sold him for 23 million with 0 Premier League minutes. Yeah. Dobbin has 17 Premier League appearances and scored a goal, yet there's question marks about his valuation being fair.
Well, there isn't question marks about it. The Premier League are saying that it's fair value as part of a swap deal. The Brewster deal really doesn't come into it, because if you have a look at the Premier League rules, is if you sell a player to another club and there's no swapping coming back the other way, then that's done at arm's length. Is you're both acting in your own self-interest. It's a bit like Branthwaite, isn't it? We've got a valuation of Branthwaite for our interest. United have got a valuation of Branthwaite for their interests. There's no collusion there, is it? And it's the same with like any player, academy player going from one club to another, where there's no swap coming another way. That is a deal the Premier League is quite happy that it happens at arm's length in with the rules. Well, what the club's prepared to pay, that's their business. Yeah. It's like the Saudi deals. It's got no jurisdiction over the Saudi FA. But as long as there's only one player involved between two clubs, that's an arm's length transaction as far as the Premier League concerned. Whether Bruce or whoever's worth 20 million, that's between the clubs themselves.
I mean, I get the swap deals, but is it not talking about transfer deals in its entirety as well? Not just this being, but are we not getting into murky waters with the Premier League can do it with this? Can they not do it with other transfer deals?
No, because as far as they're concerned, it happens at arm's length. They're called threshold transactions within the within the laws. You have associated party transactions with City guarantors all over, but these are called threshold transactions, where one club is selling to another, and it's just a single transaction. Over £1 million actually, and the Premier League are quite happy that they're conducted at arm's length. Where the Premier League get a bit, a bit ratty about is if there looks like it isn't at arm's length because the two clubs have swapped players for similar fees right near the end of the the PSR window, whatever you call it. That's why they I've looked at a couple of these, but as long as it's fair value, then they're quite happy. They'd only be unhappy if it was 20 million, 25 million, I think.
I mean, Joe, again, we are going into murky waters a little bit, but it's also coincided with the fact that Manchester United have offered a derisory valuation, from our point of view, for Jarrad Branthwaite to Everton. There's a lot of talk about whether Everton should sell before the PSR deadline, because obviously that, the sale of Branthwaite or the sale of a player with a high valuation would then keep us in the threshold. But I just find it a bit like, we've got a question here from Dave Mack saying, so guys, if the Premier League are the arbiters of the transfer values, then why don't they step in and tell United their valuation of Jarrad is Drazari?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's...
We know that from our point of view, that's not Jarrad Branthwaite's true valuation. We see.
Everton turn it down anyway.
Yeah, no,
so
exactly.
They
yeah,
don't need to step in, do they? Because so I mean, there's no need for the Premier League to kind of get involved at that point, is there?
But again, I know you're saying this is with regards to swap deals, but there is a line saying Herbert has reminded clubs that it has the power to order the return of a transfer fee in full or in part to a buying club if it judges that the fee has been inflated.
That's to do with swap deals, though.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, why would they stop? Why would they stop there?
But they're allowed to under their rules, as long as the transfer is at arm's length, i.e. one club is selling to the other and there's no swap, they are content that whatever the buying club is prepared to buy it for, whoever that is, whether that's Branthwaite or Brewster or whoever, then they're content with that, because it's an arm's length transaction, that both clubs are operating in their own self-interest and are not colluding. As I say, let me say again, that if there's a swap the other way around the same time, that's when there's an opportunity for collusion. And as I say, that's what happened with Juventus in Italy. We're overinflating your assets to the benefit of both clubs. That's what they want to avoid, and that's why they've sent that out last night. And I just reminded clubs of their responsibilities and the rules. It's not an issue. At the end of the day, it's a short-term thing anyway. You get a bit. It's not free money, is it? We don't just gain 9 million, do we? Here, no. We've got Tim, whatever his name is, apologies. We've got him to pay for the next three years. So it's not free money, is it? And I don't think it's something that will happen very often in the future. But if it did, they're just giving a warning to clubs to mind with the rules. That's just good governance for me.
No, I mean, that's
we all
fine.
lose otherwise, don't we?
I just don't think it's on the Premier League to determine a valuation of a player whatsoever.
Well, it is if, as they say in the rule book, they expect collusion between the two clubs and they're operating in bad faith, that they are artificially inflating the values of players to circumvent the PSR rules. I think that's what the rule book's there for, isn't it? It's not for their role. If Club A wants to sell a player to Club B as a single standalone transaction, it's not the Premier League's role to interject and say, tell you what, Branthwaite, United, you're 40 million, that's way too short. That's not their role, and that's what the rules say. It's an arm's length transaction, they're not really interested in them.
No, but I do wonder, just going back to Oz's point with the question that the point that he made with regards to Brewster and Dobbin, based on the Premier League's criteria of valuing players, Lewis Dobbin should be valued more than Brewster. Now, obviously, Everton have taken into account what they think his valuation is, and there's scrutiny on that already. There was no scrutiny with regard. I know it's not the same thing because it's swap deals and playing, but there was no scrutiny with regards to Sheffield United, wasn't it, paying that money for Brewster?
Yeah, because it's an arm's length transaction. Also, as well, what's quoted as the fee is not necessarily the fee that actually gets paid up front, as we well know, but obviously, in these type of swaps, you've got to pay the fee in its entirety. That's got to be full income. What I'm saying is that just a single transaction between clubs, the Premier League are not really bothered about that. But at the same time, I get exactly why people, are up in arms a little bit about this, because it's in the context of our own PSR. Yeah. All the stuff around Branthwaite. Yeah. I totally get that. But when you look at the rule book, puts a slightly different twist on things. Really, it's only reminding clubs of the rules, and I've not got a problem with that.
No, that's fine. That's why you're on this podcast, Gav, because we like your views. I mean, Joe, just to move it on a little bit, because we don't want to keep going back and forth. It's kind of relevant because the Manchester City case and them taking the Premier League to court, it's relevant to all this, isn't it? Because if Manchester City end up winning this case, then a precedent could be set, and then who knows what's going to happen with these PSR rules or the Premier League's ability to govern the league itself.
Yeah, well, they're different things because obviously associated party transactions.
No, yeah,
That's
it's
in relation
different,
to
but-
sponsorship,
yeah.
isn't it? I mean, it's another. Obviously, if Man City win that case, then it means that companies that are associated to the ownerships of Premier League clubs aren't really limited in what they can do, and can potentially, again, we'll get back to fair market value, but inflate the deals and therefore boost the revenues and therefore boost the spending capacity on the PSR limits of the clubs that help in the fund. So obviously that would clearly be a problem because it would probably lead to a two-horse race in the Premier League between Newcastle United and Manchester City as the two state-backed clubs, wouldn't it? So, I like the Premier League is fighting to protect the integrity of the game and the PSR regulations on a number of different fronts at the minute. I actually think that probably it's in all our best interest if the Premier League wins most of those battles. But that doesn't mean to say whilst as I say, I think that it's right that we have football regulation, financial regulation in the Premier League. I do think that there are times when perhaps there's a lot of people acting out of pure defensiveness here. When a better solution on some of these in some of these instances might just be a few people just putting their hands up and saying, look, this isn't quite right. Can we have a sensible conversation about how we amend these rules, or can we thrash out a little bit of finer detail to give clubs greater clarity on how we interpret this piece of the legislation and things like that. I think the Premier League is probably struggling. I mean, obviously spent £30 million on legal fees last season. It's got the Manchester City 115 charges case separate to all of this. It feels like it's probably going to have to, at the very least, pay close attention to the calculations of a number of clubs this year. There were 6 or 7 that were at risk of breaching PSR. Obviously, Everton are one of them, and they may all end up being underneath the limit. But I think if the Premier League wants to act as a competent regulator, it's going to have to apply due diligence to the calculations that it receives to make sure that they are all right. It's only fair they did that with Everton, and they cast a hell of a lot of scrutiny on a lot of things that Everton have done. I'm not saying that's wrong, but obviously they need to be consistent in their application of that. So, I think it's difficult, isn't it? Yeah. Like, I think if you got 10 people in you look at the Premier League with 20 people in it, or 20 plus 1, 20 club owners in the Premier League, trying to find out a financial or a regulatory system that goes beyond finances that we all agree on is very, very difficult. Yeah. I have a lot of sympathy with any regulator in that respect, and I don't think it would be any different if we had independent regulation. I still think there would be a lot of controversy and debate over the rules that are set. There will always be grey areas with this, and you see that in everyday life anyway. How many grey areas are there when it comes to accounting and holding people to account for questionable tactics, and what is immoral and what's illegal? They're two different standards, aren't they? So it is messy. I do think that it's very difficult to separate Everton from the context of the current PSR debate as the only club it's the first club to be held to account under the rules. The same club, the first club to be held, to be sanctioned twice in 2 seasons, and for this letter to come off the back of Everton's deal with Aston Villa, amongst others, but obviously that's the one that's had the most prominence. Like I wrote it earlier in the week, that Lewis Dobbin doesn't deserve to become the poster boy of an unfit regulatory system, and that was because most national publications that took on this issue seemed to focus on the Lewis Dobbin deal as their hook for this discussion. And I think the Premier League is effectively doing that by the timing of this letter as well. So whilst, I think in terms of the technical interpretation of everything, I think Gav's absolutely spot on. As he is with most things.
Don't give him too much credit.
But I think that, but I do think from a PR perspective, from how all this looks, the Premier League have yet again proactively done something, which I think is completely understandable if Everton and people in and around the club take it as a slight on them. I do think that is a fair reading of the situation, even if it isn't actually the intention of this. I think that the Premier League probably could have helped everybody if they just left it 3 weeks and then did this, or left it to the end of the window and said, look, every deal that's gone through we've ratified. So please don't take this as an indication that we're unhappy with anything, but just a gentle reminder when it comes to next summer. You all have obligations to act in good faith and conduct deals with fair market value, and we will be paying attention. Surely leave it 3 or 4 weeks. Bearing in mind they've sent this, if Thursday it was reported, so say it was this week, within 4 or 5 days of the transfer deadline, or the PSR deadline, there was only very, very limited opportunity for clubs to carry out any more deals, so it wasn't really a kind of a preventative measure due to the lateness and the proximity of that letter to the actual PSR deadline. As a result, the timing feels more like an optics thing. And like I say, I think that I appreciate it's hard, but I think the Premier League will probably do well to spend a little bit of time looking at how its reputation, how it's perceived at the minute, and more try to just drill down on how it can kind of, fairly keep up to date and scrutinise and maintain a decent level of due diligence and everything that's going on for the benefit of all clubs in the Premier League. And I would like it, but again, it's asking a lot, I guess, but for the benefit of the wider English game as well.
Yeah, I mean, given it was all signed off, I'll probably repeat myself, but, it was all signed off, but the timing felt to me it was like shocking, and it did feel it was a little bit agenda driven. I mean, Gav, one thing is for certain for me is that the Premier League seems to be a poorer product because of all of this. If you look at
what do you mean by poor
well,
product?
January there was barely any transfer deals done because clubs couldn't, afford. Well, they could afford it, but they were unable to. Give it another. If this carries on, give this another 12, 18 months. Clubs aren't going to be able to buy the best players around Europe and bring them to the Premier League, the world.
That's a separate point. The first point that I totally agree with what Joe's saying there. About the time, and I understand the time, and what I think has been wrong is like some of the stuff that's been out there about Everton and Villa, I suppose, that they've bent the rules, that there is a loophole they've taken advantage of. There's no loophole, there's no bending of the rules. They've undertaken a transaction that's well within the rules that the Premier League is happy with. So, there's been no bending of the rules to meet PSR. It's perfectly acceptable, and and I think it's wrong that the club has been criticised by outsiders for saying that there's some sort of chicanery going on there. There isn't. They've undertaken a fair transaction well within the rules, so I shouldn't have a problem with that. The second thing is it's a slight, and we spoke about this before we came on air, and it applies to Everton, is once you get into the PSR difficulties where you're in and around the threshold, £105 million, it's very difficult to get out of it, isn't it, really? And that's the problem. If you and it doesn't matter how rich your club are, I suppose, in some respects, if you have a third of the league in that position where they can't really do much, they're just perpetually trying to live within the 105 million. They can't really buy stuff, and if they've got to sell just to live within it, they can't move players on. I see what you're saying there, that ultimately, you get two groups of clubs in the Premier League. Well, and that's fair, fair enough. You've lived within your means and you can perform to expectation. That's fine. But it goes back to about what Joe was saying before. I think, about rehabilitation. It's very difficult to get back onto a level playing field.
You're chasing your tail all the time, aren't you?
And I see what you're saying there. And there's a possibility, not so much now, but in the future, that it does damage the product. And this is probably an unforeseen consequence of the rules.
I think it's already happened.
I get that completely. But you don't know to what extent. But certainly the potential is there, isn't it? Well, you've seen it with Everton, isn't it? Once we're in the mire, it's very difficult to get yourself out of it. And it will be interesting to see how it pans out for the you've got Leicester coming up there, another club, aren't you? You've got PSR issues. You could have maybe 6 or 7 clubs in the Premier League next season in the 20.
Well, they've
got issues.
They've got a hearing, haven't they? Yeah, and they're going to face a points deduction more than likely.
Yeah, and it might be what we had last season, but magnified even more next season. Some of this stuff, and that becomes a bit worrying, and does sort of put this type of thing into this context. As I say, I think it's a bit of a storm in the teacup for me.
No, I mean that's fine. Obviously, if you were on Twitter last night, you would have been. I
was on Twitter. I was reading it, but I think I understand the context of it, and the environment, where Everton are and other clubs. But in the great scheme of things, I don't think it's that big an issue, personally.
Okay, transfers. Ben Godfrey, video of him in Italy circulating online of him getting a medical with Atalanta. I think a lot of people are quite interested. I mean, I know you're not going to be able to give a definitive answer, but quite interested whether this sale puts us within the PSR threshold.
I mean, you start by saying we're moving away from PSR, and you
sorry, I can't help. But this is what footballers become.
Yeah.
But Ben Godfrey, anyway. We spoke about him yesterday a little bit on the pod, but obviously love to hear your thoughts. His Everton career not being probably the best as what we wanted, but he has been, he's been a good figure, I suppose. The last season he's had some good moments, but ultimately probably not what we wanted him to be.
I think it's been a frustrating time for him, probably certainly towards the back end of his Everton stay. Came with a big price tag and a lot of hope, and started off reasonably well. But he's probably, I think most players that have been at Everton over the last 5 or 6 years can say that their fortunes were largely out of their control by the chopping and changing of managers and directors of football and style, and the way in which signings were kind of brought in without a real strategy for a big part of the Farhad mission, or without a consistent strategy for a large part of the Farhad Mashiri years, and then just on top of that, he's been really unfortunate with injuries. He had a big chance to give himself a new degree of impetus, I think, in his Everton career. The season that after the Lampard summer, when he started the first game of the season against Chelsea in three centre-backs. And unfortunately, I think he lasted 11 minutes before being stretchered off, and Yerry Mina, one of the other three centre-backs, only lasted 70. We didn't really see either of them until the following November. Look, I think that this is a pretty decent deal for everybody. Been reported on it throughout the week, and wrote yesterday that Atalanta had a breakthrough in the negotiations, which was of a benefit to everybody. Lyon put the bigger bid in, met Everton's valuation for around 15 million euros for him. Atalanta's was a smaller offer, but as reported earlier on this week, Atalanta have always been Ben Godfrey's favoured destination for a host of reasons, and the most prominent of that is that they've had long-standing interest in him. They've tracked him for some time, and I think that we can come on to the benefits of this, or we can see the benefits from an Everton perspective with something like Iliman Ndiaye. The value of building up a relationship and holding on to it throughout a longer period of time, so that if and when an opportunity comes to go for that player, you already have that advantage. Atalanta came in for Ben Godfrey in January. They inquired about having him on loan. Everton refused to sanction it in the end, and because of how threadbare their squad was, and I guess you could argue that was a wise decision, because in the second half of the season he played a significant role. We can talk about some of his performances, and we did do a lot at the time, but there's no doubt that Sean Dyche felt he needed him, and he played a prominent role for a big part of late winter and early spring. But all that being said and done, he's a player who's been offered a new deal. Was reluctant to take it because I think he knew his first team opportunities were limited. If he doesn't take it, which as you just mentioned, then probably reluctant to do so on the current basis of the squad. He enters the last 12 months of his contract, which is available for free next year. Can sign a pre-contract in January, and this is Everton's last opportunity to kind of extract some value from him as part of a transfer fee. The player is open to a move if Everton are willing to accept a bid for him in the first place. I think if he sees the acceptance of a bid as a willingness from the club to countenance his departure, and on that basis he's happy to consider it himself. Wants first team opportunities. As I say, Atalanta have long been interested in him, and now they can. That's only been strengthened in recent months because they've won the Europa League, so can now offer him Champions League football. Where there would have been a problem would have been if Atalanta decided that they weren't going to budge on their first offer. because I think the players' camp were far happier for him to go there than they were to Lyon. And I think had they not managed to find the breakthrough, which they managed to do yesterday with Everton, that would have potentially created a scenario where you could have had the player hold on until next year when he could go for free, because I think the relationship between Atalanta and the lure of them is so much more enticing than Lyon was. For reasons including those that I've just mentioned. Fortunately, that isn't going to happen. He flew to Milan this morning, set to undergo a medical, thrash out the finer terms of that deal. It will probably get over the line before Sunday. I think even if the paperwork wasn't signed by Sunday, the fact that so much progress has been made on it this side of the accounting deadline means that I think the Premier League would allow Everton to effectively bank it within this PSI year if they wanted to. And every little helps, and it is a little in this case. Everton won't stand to make a huge gain on it, but again, it's another sale. It's more money coming in, more money off the amortisation books and things like that, and certainly it's a big help for next year where they don't have to carry on taking into account his transfer fee, and they don't have to carry on taking into account his wages. And I think it's a good deal all around, because I think Everton, let's be honest, he's probably fourth choice centre back at best, and probably at best third choice right back, maybe even fourth choice right back. He sees himself as a centre back. I think there's an understanding really that Sean Dyche prefers for big physical presences whilst he's trying to play two at the back. You look at Tarkowski, you look at Branthwaite, you look at Michael Keane, who's always seemed to be third choice, and you see that template there. So I think there's probably a belief that even if Branthwaite was to end up departing this summer, it would either be Keane that would get first choice, or if Everton were to dip back, or if it wasn't going to be Keane that would step up, Everton would probably more likely dip back into the transfer market again rather than perhaps start Godfrey, unless Dyche was willing to move to free centre-backs, which I don't think is currently in his plans. So I think Everton get a fee for a player for a squad player. The player moves to a club that genuinely want him and should be able to give him first team minutes. And I think everybody benefits so long as this gets signed off. So I think he should leave with everybody's best wishes, and that's it really. Hopefully, it's another sign of, written for months about how big an opportunity the summer transfer window is for Everton, both in terms of players coming in and players going out. Even with not much money to spend, Farwell has an opportunity due to the players and their contract situations to properly start to reshape, or probably start to actually shape a squad that's built with a certain purpose in mind, as opposed to this kind of mix and match Frankenstein squad of different managers and different directors of football with ambitions, which we still had even up till now, and also the other legacy of that being the big contracts that have been there. Obviously Gomez and Dele both drop off that this summer as well. So it feels like it's just another little step up the ladder towards a good summer for Everton. I've always said that regardless of the financial situation, regardless of the PSR situation, there is a good summer that's available to Everton. They need luck because of some of the financial issues. They are at the mercy of the transfer market and what other clubs do, who comes in for what player and what they offer, and similarly the domino effect and who falls out into a situation that Everton feel like they're in a position to be able to move for them. And so far, I think most of the signs have been positive, and I think the Godfrey sale is one that's positive on all sides.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, Gav, you can come in if you want, but obviously fresh start for Godfrey. Probably a good move, Europa League winners.
Great move, isn't it? He'd gone from a bit part player at Everton. He did start 13 games last season, didn't he, in the Premier League, to playing for a progressive team in the Champions League next season. It's a decent league actually at the moment as well, isn't there? Some decent players and clubs.
Good value for us, though.
Yeah, good value for us. And as Joe said, I mean, collectively, if you had Gomez, Dele Alli, and Godfrey together, their wages and I hate that word, amortised transfer fees, we lose 25 million quid next season for them three, which is good news. Great move for them. My bad memory of him, probably like a lot of Everton fans, that he'd leave with the club is the clearance in the derby, isn't it really? Yeah. Which is not a bad way to go out. That was a great clearance at a difficult time in the game for us. And if he goes out on that note, I'll forever be grateful. It's just sad that he never fulfilled what he looked like his potential in his first year. I know he had long COVID, didn't he, and he had that broken leg, but he has been a victim of circumstances. And I think one I just reading the small print is when he said he's more of an athlete than a footballer, which is probably right. But this is one of them great deals that everybody benefits from it, and I hope he has a great few years at Atlanta and does really well.
Yeah, one thing I think it's important to mention with him as well is because obviously I know there was some frustration around when he was in the side, but I think his professionalism never really been in question. He only made one Premier League start in the first half of the summer. So in the first half of the season, that was a clean sheet at Burnley when he had that incredible clearance when wasn't even on the screen for people that were watching on TV when the ball got played across and still managed to prevent it from getting to Zeki Amdouni. But during the first half of the season, I had a lot of conversations at Finch Farm and in tunnels of different stadiums up and down the country, where the main thrust of the conversation was the success that Branthwaite and Tarkowski were having at centre-back. And almost everybody that you spoke to, whether it be Dyche, whether it be Tarkowski, whether it be someone else, always relayed the success of that of those two back to the strength of that unit as a whole. So the work that the performances that we saw on the pitch were built on the foundation that included Godfrey and Michael Keane being, despite not getting very many opportunities to play in the first team, being professional enough on the training ground to make sure that standards were still high. And Ben Godfrey was very much seen as a part of that. And I think it's just another reminder of how what we see on the pitch is only a fraction of what is going on in dressing rooms and in training grounds at the clubs in which we watch and follow, and sometimes players can have a much bigger impact than we perhaps realise. And I think that I think it's fair to say that Godfrey is perhaps one of them.
Okay, well, our hour is up, and I think I would stay on for a little bit longer, but you need to get off, Gav.
Oh no, I can do another 5 minutes, mate.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah.
Well, there's obviously not really any update, but I just wanted to maybe briefly talk about Branthwaite. We'll go start with you on this, Gav, and then you can finish off. Joe, took a little bit of stick, Gav, in the comments. Last. No, obviously.
Yeah,
I just, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because again, we're not going back to PSR, but all this does coincide. Do you expect United to come back in with another bid, before the deadline, even after the deadline now?
Are we pretty 95% certain, 99% that Branthwaite won't be going before the end of the deadline? Would you think that's a fair assessment?
I'd be surprised.
Yeah.
I think that Manchester United have been they put that first offer in a fortnight ago now. They were told where to go.
Yeah.
My understanding is that their interest has remained, and that he's still someone that they're very much interested in. And the expectation for the past week or so has very much been that Man United were planning to come back in again. If they were to come back in with a sensible offer or with a lucrative offer, then that might spark something. But I also think that we probably have to made this point a couple of minutes ago of there being almost like a soft deadline with this PSR. If negotiations were to start before Sunday and a deal not get done till Tuesday, I think the Premier League would be relatively okay with that. But I do also think that I don't quite know 100% where Everton are in relation to PSR. Nobody does. If you remove the outstanding hearing, that's a big part of it and can have a massive impact on where they are. Yeah. If we just take that out of the equation at the minute, I think it's probably fair to say after the sale of Dobbin and perhaps with the sale of Godfrey that Everton are in a position where they don't need to sell one of their big assets to get into compliance. Yeah, I would anticipate that they're either just about the right side of things, or close enough to it to be able to make a decent case in terms of mitigation. Which I think is important. I do think that Everton, if they were to be accused of breaching this time round, from what we know, and obviously there's always a chance that there are things that we don't know, but if it was to be a minor breach, I do think that the position of the strength of their defence would be higher, would be stronger next time round than it has been in the previous two counts. if they were 3 or 4 million over, I think they could do things like say, well, points deduction cost us merit payments, would have brought us under that type of thing. As I say, I think we're in a kind of, I said it last week, but almost like a corridor of uncertainty where almost the benefit of that might deserve to stretch Everton's way after some of the dealings that we've seen so far. So I think that kind of removes the necessity for a quick deal, perhaps. I think it's important to remember, this could probably be our last point on of the day. I know it's one that Gav is very aware of. I think it's important to remember that the requirement for Everton to make a big sale in relation to profit and sustainability doesn't end on Sunday.
No.
Because a new financial year begins on Monday, and
for
reasons that we'll move on to probably next week. Everton will start that in a very difficult position. But obviously what they do is the time element of things goes out. There isn't a deadline. They've got a whole year to plan around how they might get around that, and a whole summer where they could, maybe it could be a few more £10 million deals here and there that help them build up towards that, as well as the reduction in wage bill and improved deals for commercial deals with companies like Castori and things like that. But just because we go past just because one accounting year ends, it doesn't mean that Everton won't have issues going to the next one.
No, yeah, absolutely. Let's just bring this back to football matters then, Gav, on Branthwaite. You would expect then, if this deadline was to pass and we hadn't sold Branthwaite, the ball would be in our court because, United have offered a derisory offer from our point of view. Yeah. I would then expect United to maybe come in with like a 50 to 55 million, which from my point of view is still low. But then we're getting into a scenario where as the weeks and months roll on towards transfer deadline day, so the second deadline of a crazy summer, that if Branthwaite was to go nearer that deadline, whether it was for 70, 80 million or whatever, we're going to need to bring someone in. So there's going to be a period of time, isn't there, where if he is going to go, he's going to have to go, and I'm sure planning has been in place, don't get me wrong, but it's going to take time to get a replacement in for Branthwaite, and we don't want that running up until deadline day.
No, absolutely. And the other thing as well is once it goes past the 30th of June, you might have other clubs coming into the market for Branthwaite who weren't there before the 30th of June as well. And that's the thing, you may have PSR difficulties themselves before the 30th of June, but I've got a bit more freedom after.
Because Arsenal are a club
absolutely.
They're a club that are tied up until the 30th of June. But then they're expecting to be okay next year.
So that's the thing, I think there's probably a reason why only United are interested. And I think I said last week, if you've only got one club interested by the laws of demand and supply, that brings Branthwaite's value down, doesn't it, a little bit? If you've got a couple of clubs interested, you get into a bit of an auction, his price goes up. And that's ideally what we want as a club, don't we? We just don't want one club in the marketplace for me. Ideally, we want 2 or 3. And that the chances of that happening increases after the 30th of June, and so that would be interesting to see if other clubs come to the table, both here and abroad, by the way. So what's the space about Branthwaite? But I do agree, we don't want to be selling them on whatever the deadline date is, like the 1st of September. Do we want, if we had to? By the way, we would want to build something during the summer.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll have plenty of updates, Joe, won't we, over the coming weeks with regards to that. Hopefully there is no update and he just stays an Everton player for the foreseeable future. Any lasting final remarks, guys, before we finish off?
No. I think pretty balanced view, as ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, all good?
All good, thank you. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all for today's show. Thank you for all your comments, all your feedback. Greatly appreciated. Give us a like, give us a share, and obviously give us a subscribe. All your support is greatly appreciated. And this podcast will be out on Apple Pods and Spotify within the next hour or so. If you prefer, if you've only just joined now and you prefer to listen to it, it will be live on the Royal Blue channel at some point over the next couple of hours. I've been Ian Kroll, joined by Gav Buckland and Joe Thomas, and this has been the Royal Blue podcast.